Good evening. I'm Ankit, and this is the Daily News Simplified of 31st of January. Now, today's newspaper, they were loaded with articles. So, we have taken 8 of the most important articles for you to cover in the total and today's Daily News Simplified. The first article, which is the prelim centric article, we will discuss the Transparency International Civil Society Organization. Because according to this body, it publishes a corruption perception index. And in this ranking, India has fallen below from 85 in the last year to 93 this year. The second article of the day is on Western disturbances. Because it is due to Western disturbances that there are fog in all over northern India. So, what are Western disturbances? We will discuss this in today's DNS. The third article is on black holes and neutron stars. Because scientists they have discovered a pair of stars whose mass they fall in between the masses of black hole and neutron stars. So we will discuss in detail about what are black holes and neutron stars because questions on various phenomena that exist in space have been a frequent occurrence in prelims section. Then we will proceed to mains related article, the first of which is on fertilizer subsidy. Because recently India's fertilizer subsidy burden they have increased manifold. It was somewhat 80,000 crores in 2020 to 21 and it has increased for more than 3 times and it is currently 2.5 lakh crores for the end of financial year 2023. This shows that government subsidy burden as far as fertilizer subsidy are concerned, it has increased manifold. So we will go into details on what kind of schemes are there by the government of India to reduce the overall subsidy burden of the government. Then in the second mains related discussion, we will discuss in detail about direct tax collection. Because India's direct tax collection in recent years, it has also increased. And this direct tax collection, it has helped government to achieve its fiscal deficit target. So what are the trends in direct tax collection and what were the reasons before that led to somewhat below par direct tax collection in the country? We will discuss them in detail because this particular news article it appeared in Business Line newspaper. Then towards the end we will discuss or we'll summarize 3 important articles that appeared in the Hindu as well as the Indian Express newspapers. So without further ado, let us start our today's discussion with this first article. But before this, let me request you to like, share and subscribe this video and the channel so that our content can reach most of the aspirants. So let us start with this first article which appeared in page 12 of the Business Line newspaper. Now this article reports that India's ranking in corruption perception index, which is brought forward by Transparency International, it has increased because increase in rank signifies decline in corruption perception index. However, is ranks important from prelims point of view? The answer is no. Rather, what is important is what kind of an index is this and which body brings this index, because these kind of questions they appear frequently in our prelims examinations. So let us discuss first what is this India's ranking. It has reduced as you can see from this graph, and India's ranking it improved post 2014, from which you can see here it increased to all time high in 2019 and since then it has reduced to 93rd this year, and this reduction in score has increased India's rankings. Now what is this body which brings this particular ranking? It is called Transparency International, which is a civil society organization and it works globally. Now this body, that is Transparency International, it was established in the year of 1993 by a former World Bank official. So this body, it is an independent body. It is not linked to World Bank. Rather, it was established by a former official. So no formal links between World Bank and Transparency International there. Also, this body, it introduces Corruption Perception Index. Now, this Corruption Perception Index, it traces down the impact of corruption in public sector. So it establishes or it monitors the corruption in public sector and not private sector. So this, please, you can keep in mind. And this Corruption Perception Index, it is an index which monitors the perceived level of corruption, and it monitors through two different criteria. First, it takes opinions of experts, and also it takes opinion through surveys. Now, the activities which are carried forward by this body, that is Transparency International, it carries out activities such as research, awareness campaign to combat corruption. And in this regarding, it engages with various bodies so as to implement conventions against corruption, and most important of them is United Nations Convention Against Corruption, that is UNCSE. Further, this body, it also works with governments, businesses and civil society organizations to promote what is known as transparency, accountability and integrity. And all these three tenets, they form an integral part of our GS4 syllabus. So from that perspective also, this particular index is important. Also, this body, its secretariat is located in Berlin, Germany. And how is this body funded? That is Transparency International. It is funded through a combination of not just government grants, but also private donations and institutional support. Now, why are we dealing with this article and why have we framed this particular question? It is because Rule of Law Index, which is brought forward by World Justice Project, it appeared in the prelims of the year 2018. So let us solve our model question. The first statement of which is the Corruption Perception Index. It is released by Transparency International, which is an arm of World Bank. Now this statement is incorrect because Transparency International, it is not an arm of World Bank. Rather, it is an independent civil society organization. The second statement, the Transparency International, it works closely with UN Convention on Corruption, which is a true statement because in our discussion, I repeatedly highlight that it combats corruption like research and awareness campaigns, and it involves with various businesses, governments and civil society body to implement various charters such as and especially United Nations Convention on Corruption. The third statement, this organization, it is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, which again is an incorrect statement because it is headquartered in Berlin, that is located in Germany. Hence, the correct statement is only one, thereby option A is the correct answer. Now moving on to the second article, which again is from Hindu Business Line and it appeared in page 14. Now this particular article, it highlights that the reason for dense fog in whole of North India currently, it is due to western disturbances. Now this western disturbances, they are an important phenomena which impacts the climate of northern plain and Himalayan region, especially in the winter months. So let us know more about what is this western disturbances. Now this western disturbances, they are extra tropical cyclones. As you can see from this image, this western disturbances, it originates in Mediterranean Sea, where moisture-laden winds, which take up moisture from Mediterranean Sea, and they move eastwards towards India. And these western disturbances, they are introduced in India through subtropical westerly jet streams. Now, these western disturbances, when they enter into India, they cause effects on weather. How this affects Indian weather? It When these moisture laden winds they enter Indian subcontinent, they are trapped in northern plains, especially due to presence of Himalayas in the northern side of India. So when Himalayas are there on the northern side, it traps moisture laden winds in the Indian northern plains. And this causes precipitation in northern plains in form of rainfall, and it also causes snowfalls on western Himalayas. So snowfalls, especially in Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, and states such as Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, especially in winter months, they can be attributed to these western disturbances. Further, these western disturbances, they also have an important economic significance because these provide moisture to rabi season crops, and they are especially beneficial for wheat crops. So you can understand that rainfall which is caused by western disturbances, they in case they provide moisture to wheat crops which increases their yield, so thereby they have a significant economic importance. Now let us solve this model question. And why are we dealing with this model question? Because geophysical and geographical phenomena, they have been an area of interest by UPSC. For example, in 2015 Prelims, you saw this question which appeared on air masses. And in similar lines, we have curated this model question on western disturbances. So let us solve this model question. The first statement, it says that they are a form of extratropical cyclones, which I have already highlighted here, is a correct statement. Now, second statement, it says it is a monsoonal precipitation pattern largely impacting North India. Now, this statement partially is correct that this pattern it impacts northern India, but this statement is also incorrect because it is a non-monsoonal precipitation. Because monsoonal precipitation in India, it happens during the period of July to September. And precipitation which occurs in months other than these are classified as non-monsoonal precipitation. Hence, second statement is incorrect because it is non-monsoonal precipitation. The third statement, it states that Arctic warming in recent times, they've increased the intensity of western disturbances. Now, on an average, we witness about 4 to 5 western disturbances per month from December to April. But these frequencies, they have reduced in the recent times, and there are primarily three important reasons for that. The first is due to Arctic warming, which is caused by global warming. This reduces the amount of western disturbances. Further, there's also a phenomena called La Nina, which negatively affects Indian western disturbances. And the third phenomena, it is the negative phase of Northern Atlantic oscillation. Because La Nina, negative Northern Atlantic oscillation, and Arctic warming, they are the reasons which have reduced the frequency of western disturbances in India recently. And this reduced frequency was also the reason of less snowfall in the months of December, especially in Jammu and Kashmir, which we dealt in DNS last week. Now let us solve this third statement that Arctic warming in recent times have increased the intensity of western disturbances, which is an incorrect statement because they have decreased the intensity and not increased it. So how many of the above statements are correct? Again, here option A is the correct answer because only statement 1 was correct. As far as this 2015 PYQ is concerned, here option B was the correct answer. Now let us move to this third article which appeared in Science and Tech section of the Hindu newspaper, which is the last page. And this article, it states that some scientists, they have discovered a bunch of stars who have a weight between 2.1 times to 2.7 times the mass of sun. And this particular weight category, it is neither in weight category of neutron stars nor it is in weight category of black holes. So what are neutron stars and what are black holes? Let us discuss them in the next slide. Now, as you can see from this particular graph, imagine there is a big star like sun. Not just big star, but many times greater the mass than that of sun. For example, there is a big star which has a mass of more than 10 to the power 25 times the mass of sun. And the fuel that powers this particular stars, it empties. So what happens is that the large mass of body, which is that star, it collapses under its own gravity. Now this collapse, it can be in two forms. Either that star can be in a form of neutron star, or that supernova explosion, that is the explosion of a dead star, it can also lead to formation of black hole. Now what are these neutron stars and what are these black holes? Let us discuss them in the next slide. Now when these supernova explosion, they take place, they can either result into formation of either neutron stars or black holes. However, these are two different types of phenomena. First, let us deal with what are neutron stars. These neutron stars, they are dense remnants of supermassive stars. Because when these supermassive stars, they collapse, they can either create neutron stars or black holes. And these black holes, they are somewhat smaller in size when you compare them with neutron stars. They are smaller in size when compared with black holes. Because these neutron stars, they have weight between either 1.4 to 2.2 times the mass of sun. Further, these neutron stars, they have high rotation speeds and they possess extremely strong magnetic fields. And these magnetic fields, they emit radiation. And these emission of radiation, they take form in form of pulsars. So these pulsars, they are associated with neutron stars and they are somewhat their magnetic emissions of these neutron stars. While on the other hand, black holes, they do not emit anything. They are so powerful in size that even the light, it cannot escape a black hole. So technically, you are not able to see a black hole, while on the other hand, you can see pulsars emitting from neutron stars. So in that way, these neutron stars are very much visible, whereas these black holes, they are invisible. However, there's this thing called event horizon, which forms the boundary of black hole. And scientists, they locate these event horizon to locate the black hole. And these black holes, they are of three different types. They can be the stellar black hole, which means that the black hole, it has formed due to the collapse of just single star. Whether, on the other hand, the intermediate black hole, it can be formed due to collapse of a star which has a mass between 100 to 1 lakh times the mass of sun. So when a star which has a mass of 100 to 1 lakh times the mass of a sun and it collapses, it can lead to formation of an intermediate black hole. While on the other hand, the biggest black hole, they are termed as supermassive black hole. And these supermassive black hole, they are resultant of a collapse of stars that have a mass of from 1 million to many billion masses of that of sun. And these black holes, they are so strong that again, they cannot even emit light. So you can trace the existence of black hole through this event horizon, which is the boundary of a black hole. Now let us solve this model question. And we are dealing with this model question because various phenomena that occurs in space, it is a specific area of interest for UPSC. For example, this Cepheid nebula and pulsars, they were asked in UPSC only last year. Hence, we have curated a question on neutron stars and black holes. And the first statement, it states that neutron stars, they are collapsed cores of massive supergiant stars formed by supernova explosion. Again, this statement is correct because I've highlighted in this previous slide, and you can refer to the notes for the explanation. The second statement, similar to black holes, neutron stars are characterized by an event horizon, which is an incorrect statement because event horizon, they are boundaries of black holes, and there are no event horizon in case of neutron stars. So thereby the correct answer to this PYQ is option A, whereas the correct answer to this model PYQ was option A again. Now let us move to the mains related articles. The first of which it appeared in page 10 of the Indian Express newspaper. And this editorial by Indian Express, it highlights that India's subsidy, that is especially the fertilizer subsidy burden, it has increased more than 3 times. Because back in 2019-2020, India's subsidy burden was somewhat 81,000 crore rupees. Now, this subsidy burden in the financial year of 2022-23, it has more than trebled, which means more than 2.5 lakh crore is central government subsidy outgo in terms of fertilizer subsidy. Now, this particular article, it also highlights that union government, it has introduced price capping of fertilizers which are covered under nutrient based subsidy regime. Now again, these nutrient based subsidy regime, they cover subsidies which are other than on fertilizers which are other than urea. So we'll discuss in detail what kind of a subsidy regime India follows in terms of fertilizer. But why are we dealing with this particular news article? Because UPSC GS paper 3 syllabus, it directly mentions issues related to direct and indirect farm subsidies. And fertilizer subsidy, they are an example of direct farm subsidy. Further, this particular topic has been an area of interest for UPSC. Even back in 2013, a question appeared on different types of agricultural subsidy. Also, subsidies, especially with respect to food security and other areas, they are also appearing in UPSC from time to time. So, it is necessary for us to cover this article in detail, explaining you the types of subsidy regime in India, especially with relation to fertilizers, and how it has increased in the recent times. Right? So, let us start with understanding what are fertilizers and why India needs to provide subsidy to farmers to promote the use of fertilizers. First of all, fertilizers on a very basic level, they are like food for crops. Because these fertilizers, they provide crops with necessary nutrients. And these nutrients, they are necessary for increasing the health of crop. because more the nutrients we provide to the crop, the higher will be the crop yield. Now, especially before the era of green revolution, Indian farmers, they employed somewhat a traditional type of fertilizers, which led to somewhat low levels of farm productivity. But after green revolution, government of India, it realized the importance of these fertilizers, that farmers, they need to be provided with chemical fertilizers, and these fertilizers should be at nominal and cheap rates, so to increase India's farm productivity and agricultural yield. Hence came into fruition the India's fertilizer subsidy regime. Now, technically, these fertilizers, they are classified into various kinds. For example, urea is a fertilizer which primarily provides nitrogen to crops, whereas other subsidies, for example, muriate of potash, it is responsible for providing potassium to crops, whereas diammonium phosphate, it provides phosphate to crops. Now, these are major nutrient or major fertilizers, while on the other hand, there are also micro fertilizers which provide micronutrients such as iron, sulfur, nickel, etc. to crops. And these nutrients, especially N, potassium, phosphate, and these micronutrients, they are important for increasing agricultural yield. Now, India, it usually classifies fertilizer regime into two different categories. First regime is specially meant for urea fertilizers, and this forms the largest component of India's fertilizer subsidy burden. Now, earlier, government of India, it used to follow a cost plus method to provide subsidy for urea fertilizers, which meant that this even today urea is available at a subsidized cost in the market, and this MRP, it is fixed by the union government. Now, for example, urea, it is available, or a bag of urea, it is available at 1000 rupees. But on the other hand, the cost of producing this urea may be somewhat larger. Just for example, the cost of producing urea might be 1200 rupees. So the difference between production cost and fixed MRP, it is given by the government to fertilizer companies in a form of subsidy. So from this example, it is just an example, the subsidy burden of government per urea bag is 200 rupees. And this is what you call a cost plus method, because whatever cost it goes over and above MRP, it is compensated by the government to the fertilizer companies in form of subsidy. Right? This was cost plus method that was followed up till the year of 2015. However, naturally, you can understand that fertilizer company, they have no incentive to reduce these production cost of fertilizers, because they know whatever the increase in cost of their fertilizers, it will be compensated by the government in form of subsidy. So naturally, the subsidy burden on the government, it increased over a period of time. Hence, in this regard, the form of new urea policy. Now, in this new urea policy, what the government did was that it categorized fertilizer companies into three categories. And these categories were divided in forms of energy they use to manufacture urea. And depending upon these three categories, the government, it fixed the amount of subsidy for a particular category company. For example, there are three categories A, B, and C. The highest burden of the subsidy, or the companies which come under A category, will be given same amount of subsidy, which again will be true for companies under B and C, and these are differential amount of subsidies per kilogram of urea. So what was intended to do was that these companies, they should be incentivized to reduce their production cost if they are to achieve parity with their peer companies. Hence, this new urea policy was introduced in 2015 to overall reduce the subsidy burden with the government. However, even after introducing new urea policy, subsidy burden on urea is very high and it accounts for almost 75% of total subsidy burden in terms of fertilizer. Now, also you can see that government it exercises excess control over urea fertilizers. First of all, it fixes the MRP of urea. It also controls the import of urea, and further it also controls the distribution of urea. Hence, from this particular example, you can understand that subsidy burden on urea is completely controlled by the government. While on the other hand, let us discuss what is this nutrient based subsidy. Now, this nutrient based subsidy regime, it is applicable to 22 types of fertilizers, which are fertilizers other than urea. For example, muriate of potash, diammonium phosphate, which are major fertilizers, they are also covered under nutrient based subsidy scheme. And in this scheme, what government does is that it fixes subsidy based on the amount of nutrient a fertilizer has. Hence, it fixes the amount of subsidy based on nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphate and potassium. Hence, the companies who manufacture fertilizers, they only get a fixed amount of subsidy. While on the other hand, the MRPs of fertilizers which are under NBS regime, it is decontrolled. What it means that fertilizer companies, they are free to fix the MRP of fertilizers and they only achieve or they only receive a fixed amount of subsidy. So naturally, when the burden of subsidy is fixed, these companies, they are incentivized to reduce the MRP, because otherwise some other company will provide fertilizers for cheaper cost and the farmers will go up and buy those fertilizers. Hence, you can see this nutrient based subsidy regime, it encourages competition among fertilizer companies, which was not the case in terms of urea. Hence, from decontrolling the nutrient based subsidy regime, government has reduced its subsidy burden in terms of MOP and DAP fertilizers. However, today's news article, it reports that government now it has fixed the MRP of fertilizers under this nutrient based subsidy regime, and in this regard the companies who manufacture fertilizers under NBS, they can only keep the MRP of more than 8 to 12% of their production cost. So in this way, the companies or the government, it is somewhat exercising a control even on the decontrolled NBS subsidy regime. And this, according to today's news article, is a regressive step by the government of India. Although we understand that government of India, essentially it wants to provide cheap fertilizers to farmers. However, by fixing the MRP with just 8 to 12% over the production cost, what government is doing is that it is disincentivizing the companies to undertake true businesses, which will affect the availability of fertilizers in the country. So this is what the fertilizer subsidy regime in India currently looks like. Now, what are the issues with India's fertilizer subsidy regime? Let us understand this in this particular slide. First of all is naturally the increased fiscal burden on the government. As again I highlighted at the start of the discussion, the fiscal burden on the government, it was 81,000 crores in 2019-20, and this has increased 3 times to more than 2.5 lakh crores in the year 2022 and 23. And even in the current fiscal year, that is 23-24, Government of India it estimated the subsidy burden by 1.75 lakh crores, which according to news article it is expected to be more than this figure. So you can see the subsidy burden on the government, it creates a fiscal burden on the state exchequer, which amounts to about 0.84% of GDP. So this is a huge burden on the government. Now again, let us consider the other challenge, which is the cost of production. Now the most important raw material in manufacturing of fertilizers is natural gas. Now this natural gas, India, it is dependent on imports to source these natural gas, which is a significant raw material for production of urea and other fertilizers. However, since Russia-Ukraine war, what has happened? The cost of these natural gas, it has increased manifold. Because due to Russia-Ukraine war, Russia is a large supplier of natural gas, and this has created a supply-demand mismatch in the international market. And due to disruption of Russian supplies, the cost of natural gas it has increased in the past 1.5 years. And this has overall increased the cost of production not just of Indian fertilizers but also imported fertilizers. And this cost of production it is borne solely by subsidy of the government, which has increased overall subsidy burden of the government, which you can see has increased 3 times. Right. Now, another issue with the fertilizer subsidy regime in India, especially with that of urea subsidy, is that it promotes inefficiency among companies. Again, I highlighted that India, it used to follow what was known as cost plus method, where the difference between production cost and MRP, it was borne solely by the government in form of subsidy. So you can see any company will not be incentivized to reduce this production cost, because the company it well knows that government will instead provide these companies with subsidy burden, which will compensate them for increased prices of production. Hence, this in a way promotes inefficiency, especially among urea manufacturing companies. Also, you can understand that India it is dependent on imports to meet its demand for not just urea but also diammonium phosphate. For example, in the last 15 years or so, India's production of urea has stagnated to 25 million metric tons. However, in the last 15 years, the demand has increased in terms of urea, which is currently 33 million metric tons. 8 million metric tons you can see is met by of urea. And also million metric tons India imports diammonium phosphate. And this imports, it solely means that India it is prone to fluctuation of prices of fertilizers in the international market. So this import dependency not just creates our dependence on other countries, fertilizer price changes in international market. Also, let us consider the nature of subsidies. Now this subsidy it is not fixed per farmer. Rather, government it extends subsidy per unit of fertilizer use. So naturally, larger is the farmer, the more fertilizer he or she uses. So this means that the burden of government in terms of fertilizer subsidy, it is more in terms of large farmers because they end up using more units of fertilizers. Therefore, the government support it is inclined more towards larger farmers rather than small farmers who use less fertilizers, and therefore the overall subsidy burden on the government is low in terms of small farmers. Further, India also, according to Agreement of Agriculture of World Trade Organization, it needs to limit its agricultural subsidies to 10% of its total agricultural produce cost. And this should be done at the levels of 1986. An increased burden on subsidy, it has a risk of superseding this particular target of 10%. Hence, not just increasing subsidy burden will benefit large farmers more, but it can also increase the risk of breaching this 10% target which was fixed by Agreement of Agriculture under the World Trade Organization. Further, as I already highlighted, the MRP of urea, it is fixed, and this is somewhat very low as compared to the original cost of urea production. And this difference between MRP and cost of urea production, it is borne by the government in form of subsidy. Therefore, urea, it is available at somewhat very cheaper price as compared to other farmers in the open market. And this means that farmers, they have a tendency to overuse urea. Therefore, the nutrient balance in Indian soil, it breaches the required target of 4:2:1, that is of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and this burden has somewhat increased in favor of urea because Indian farmers, they have an over tendency to use urea because of its price. And due to this overuse of fertilizers in Indian context, what we have seen is that India's farm productivity originally has reduced because overuse of fertilizers, it creates soil infertility, and it also can lead to environment pollution and negative impacts on human health. Thereby, limited awareness among farmers with respect to harmful use of fertilizers has created not just soil degradation but also negatively affected human health and environmental pollution. Therefore, the issues with relation to fertilizer subsidy regime in the country, it is primarily due increased fiscal burden, increased cost of production, promoting inefficiencies in the market, has rendered India solely dependent on imports for meeting its domestic demand. The regressive nature of subsidy regime and limited awareness among farmers, which creates negative impact on not just climate but also on human health. So, what are the measures that the government has undertaken in order to promote or reduce the subsidy burden in the country? The first measure, it is introduction of One Nation, One Fertilizer scheme. And under this scheme, what government does is that it provides Bharat brand fertilizers in the country. Because any fertilizer bag which is manufactured by any private company, it has to have the branding of Bharat on 2/3 of its pack size. Whereas the company branding will only be on 1/3 area of the fertilizer packets. Therefore, what it does is that it provides a one brand fertilizer to the whole of Indian agricultural market. And this will create a negative incentive on farmers who prefer one kind of fertilizer. For example, fertilizers which is manufactured by IFFCO in Uttar Pradesh, it is in huge demand in state of Rajasthan. So you can understand that fertilizers which is made by IFFCO plant in Uttar Pradesh, they have to be transported to Rajasthan. And this creates transport cost. And this transport cost is also borne by government in form of its subsidy. So preference or availability of just a single branded fertilizer in Indian market, it will reduce farmers' preference for a particular kind of brand, which will then reduce the transportation cost of fertilizer in India. Hence, this will reduce the overall subsidy burden which is borne by the government. Now the second step, it is known as PM Pranam initiative, which is a short form for PM program for restoration. awareness, nourishment, and amelioration of Mother Earth. Now, in this scheme, what government wants to do is that it wants to promote the balanced use of fertilizers. Now, the state governments, they are incentivized to promote balanced use of fertilizers. And how is this scheme funded? Now, whatever savings the government is able to achieve, it will transfer 50% of these savings to states, which then the states will use to increase production of alternate fertilizer and reward farmers who have reduced their fertilizer use. So this PM Pranam scheme, it intends to balance the use of fertilizers by reducing the use of chemical fertilizers. Further, recently, government also introduced 600 new PM Samruddhi Kisan Samruddhi Kendras, which is short form of PM KSK. Now, these fertilizer retail shops in the country, they will be converted into PM KSK units, and these PM KSK units will not just sell fertilizers to farmers, but they will also help increase awareness of farmers for use of sustainable fertilizers. Further, they will also help farmers increase their crop yields, help soil testing facility, which will overall intends to reduce the use of chemical fertilizers in the country. And when overall the use of chemical fertilizers by our agricultural sector will reduce, automatically this will translate into reduced subsidy burden by the government. Also, government has undertaken several steps to reduce the misuse of fertilizers. First is that it provided for neem coating of urea. Because by introducing neem coating of urea, government it wants to prevent the diversion of urea for non-agricultural purposes. Further, government has also introduced some behavioral changes. For example, it has reduced the size of urea bags in the country, which was earlier available in form of 50 kg bags. Now this size is reduced to a 45 kg bags, which again is a form of a behavioral change, because farmers, they are used to buy a particular number of fertilizer bags, and if a farmer, he or she uses 10 bags for a particular season, it will translate into reduction of 50 kg of fertilizers. Hence, by reducing the bag size, government it wants to reduce the overall use of fertilizers in the country. Also, recently, IFCO it brought forward what was known as nano urea. Now, earlier, urea is available in form of powder which we physically throw on the farmland. But rather, the introduction of nano urea, it will enhance the use of fertilizers in the country, because this one bottle of nano urea, it is equivalent to one bag of urea fertilizer. And this nano urea, which is available in nano size, it increases the efficiency of urea use, which again overall will reduce the subsidy burden of the government. Also, to promote the balanced use of fertilizer in the country, government it wants farmers to get their soil tested. And how can they get them tested? By introducing soil health cards. Because when a farmer, they take their land samples to a soil health card center, they will give this farmer a kind of a certificate which will tell farmer what kind of fertilizer and what amount of fertilizer should the farmers use. Hence, it will increase awareness among farmers on judicious use of fertilizers, thereby reducing the overall subsidy burden with the government. Now, after we have dealt with measures that have been taken by the government, let us now discuss what is the way forward in further reducing the subsidy burden on the government. The first and probably the most important argument in this regard is to deregulate the price of urea, because currently urea is available in a controlled maximum retail pricing. And due to this control maximum retail pricing, which we have seen has led to imbalanced use of urea in the country. And this imbalanced use of urea has increased the subsidy burden with the government. Hence, by deregulating the MRP of urea, these MRP will then be fixed by the companies themselves. And with the companies themselves, they will be fixing the MRP of urea, and the amount also of subsidy will be fixed. Then these companies, they will be encouraged to reduce the cost of production. And this reduction in cost of production of urea will also reduce the subsidy burden of the government. Further, when urea it is available at somewhat increased price in the market, farmers they will be apprehensive of overusing urea. Thereby, it will not just reduce the subsidy burden with the government, it will also promote judicious use of fertilizers. Further, there are about 30 companies currently who manufacture urea in the country. However, out of these 30 companies, there are only 3 companies who can import urea. And this is what is called canalization of import, which reduces the amount of import that can happen in the country, and this creates mismatch in both demand and supply of urea. Because as only 3 companies they can import urea in the country, hence the meeting of supply and demand gap it takes time, which then negatively affects the availability of fertilizer in the country. Hence, the important step is to decanalize the import of urea in the country. Also, government should look to promote local production of fertilizers in India, because I've already highlighted in the past 15 years or so, India's urea production has stagnated to 25 million metric tons. Hence, when the country it is or it will be able to produce these fertilizers locally, it will not just reduce the burden of imports in the country, but it will also reduce the volatility of pricing of natural gas in the country. Further, government it should also look to promote sustainability in terms of use of fertilizers, because by use of soil health card schemes, government it intends to promote the sustainable use of fertilizers. So increasing the penetration of these soil health card centers, what the government can further improve is the sustainability of use of urea in the country. Further, instead of providing subsidy per unit of fertilizer, what the government can also do is to provide income support to farmers in a form of fixed payment per year. And utilizing this import support, then the farmers they can buy fertilizers at a decontrolled MRP, and this will reduce the disadvantage currently that incentivizes the company to reduce their production cost. So when the prices of fertilizers will be deregulated, it will promote companies to reduce their production cost. And when the income support scheme it replaces the subsidy regime currently, it will not just rationalize the subsidy burden with the government, but will also incentivize the farmers to buy certain fertilizers that are most efficient and cost effective in nature. Sorry, thereby introducing import support scheme, what government can do is that it will enable the market forces to play a key role in fertilizer sector in the country. Hence, this was all for today's discussion in our first article on subsidy regime with respect to fertilizers. And with this, let us move to the second article of the day, which appeared in page 6 of the Hindu Business Line newspaper. Now, this article, as you can see, highlights that India's tax collection, especially that of direct taxes, it has increased in the recent past. And this increase in tax collection, it has enabled the government of India to reduce its fiscal deficit. Now, this article primarily it highlights three trends with respect to tax collection. First, that it highlights the amount of tax revenues. Now, according to this article, the tax revenue of the union government it has increased 10 times in the past 2 decades. Where previously it was 3 lakh crore rupees, this has increased to rupees 30 lakh crores. Now, this has increased the spending power of the government, because government it has some expenditures which can be met by the income, and the most important source of income of the government is tax revenues. Hence, when the tax revenue they increase, the income of the government can also be supported through these increase in tax revenue. Now, the second trend that this article highlights is tax base of the country. And this article reports that the tax base in the country it has broadened in the recent past. While back in 2014, almost 3.3 crore people they paid taxes in India, or rather 3.3 crore people they filed for tax returns every year in 2014. However, in 2023, we can see that this number of tax people who file tax return it has increased to 7.4 crores. Hence, this has increased more than 2 times. That means that the tax base of our country it has broadened in the past 9 years. Also, this article highlights that the contribution of direct taxes it has increased for more than 50%, and currently it is around 54.6% of total tax collection. Now, why it is important for the contribution of direct taxes to be more than indirect taxes? Because the burden of direct taxes is on the person who has to pay the tax itself. Also, these direct taxes they are progressive in nature, which means higher you earn, the more income tax you pay. This is what is known as progressive taxation. While on the other hand, the burden of indirect taxes is same on everyone. Whether you're earning 10,000 a month or you're earning 10 lakhs a month, the amount of indirect taxes that you pay on goods and services, it is same on everyone. Hence, the indirect taxes, they are not progressive in nature. While on the other hand, the burden of direct taxes, it changes according to the amount of money you earn every year. And more amount of money you earn, the higher is the amount of taxes you pay. This is what you call progressive taxation. And it is applicable or it is significant to ensure economic equality in the country. Hence, the contribution of direct taxes when it increases of more than 50%, this highlights that the tax system of the country is somewhat progressive in nature. Hence, this article it highlights three important facts: that our tax revenues has increased 10 times, our tax base has increased for more than 2 times, and also the contribution of direct taxes it is more than indirect taxes. Now, why are tax collection important from macroeconomic point of view? Again, I highlighted that government it has some kind of expenditures that it should make every year. And where the money comes for these expenditures, it is majorly comes from tax collection of every government. Hence, more the taxes the government can collect, more the amount of welfare and infrastructural spending that government can make. And this is important from UPSC GS Paper 3 perspective, which highlights issues relating to mobilization of resources. Further, tax initiatives they are also important part of government's budgeting. which you can see that various taxes have been subject of UPSC questions, especially in the year of 2018. Hence, we should know what is the trend of tax collection in India and what are the reasons for somewhat lower tax collection in the country. However, this news comes as a pleasant surprise to Indian economy because recently or in the past, India's direct tax collection have been somewhat lower than what is the true potential. And what are the reasons for somewhat low collection of direct taxes back in time? Let us discuss this in the next slide. Now, majorly, India's informal economy size is quite large. And due to this large size of India's informal economy, what happens that major transactions are happens in form of cash. And this cash transaction, they are out of formal economy because you cannot estimate the amount of cash exchange that can happen between two or many individuals. Thereby, the larger is the size of informal economy, the more difficult it is for the government to estimate the exact size of economic transaction, thereby making imposition of taxes more and more difficult. Further, India also provides exemption from income tax to members who are involved in vocation of agriculture. And large part of Indian economy is they are employed as agriculturists, and these section they are not subjected to income taxes. Hence, this reduces the amount of tax base in the country because people who are involved in agriculture they do not pay any taxes, especially income taxes. Further, India is also witness or India is witness to high amount of tax litigation, and there are as many as 5 lakh pending cases of tax litigation in the country. And these 5 lakh pending cases, it not just increases the burden on the administration, but it also reduces the tax collection in the country. Further, as I've already highlighted, even after today's development, India's tax base is only 7.4 crores. And this is out of more than 140 crore population. Hence, you can see that just about 5% of people of India, they are just returning or they are just filing their income tax returns, which signifies that the tax base of the country is very low. And this has been primarily because of two important reasons. The first is that per capita income of the country is low. Thereby, the people who earn more than the tax collection threshold, it is just 7.4%. Further, India also witnesses high amount of tax avoidance. Because again, due to increased size of informal economy, it is difficult for the government to estimate the exact amount of earnings and financial transaction. So for example, if a person is dealing in cash and even if that person is earning 15 lakhs per year, he or she can file a tax return saying that they are only earning 5 lakhs per year because the government due to tax transaction will not be able to estimate the exact amount of his earnings. Therefore, larger is the informal economy, the higher is the amount of tax avoidance by people. And this in broad terms lowers the tax base of the country. Further, India also has somewhat high rates of income taxes. And what high rates of income taxes does is that it reduces the amount of tax collection and it can be understood in form of Laffer curve. As this Laffer curve, it plots tax rates on x-axis and revenue on y-axis. And this graph goes like this because as you increase the tax rate in an economy, the revenue collection of the government, it also increases. But after a certain point, when you increase the tax rate in an economy, the collection of tax revenues, it goes down. Because when the incidence of tax on a particular economy is high, people then look to avoid paying income taxes. Thereby, it also increases high amount of avoidance. Thereby, according to Lafar curve, you can only increase tax rates up to a certain level, after which it will prove prohibitive as far as tax revenues are concerned. And due to high income tax rates, the collection it has reduced in the recent past. Further, there are also inefficiencies in the tax administration because again most of the tax administration they are involved in litigation. Further, due to manpower shortage, the staff they cannot adequately go and raid violators of the income tax acts. Thereby, due to inefficiency in not just revenue estimation but also in revenue collection, we have witnessed high amount of tax avoidance, thereby reducing the total tax collection in the country. But what are the government steps that had increased the tax collection in the recent past? Let us find out in the next slide. Now, in the last few years, government has taken some steps to increase tax collection in the country. The first and probably the most important step is that government has cross-linked our PAN card, which is our permanent account number cards, with that of Aadhaar card. And this cross-seeding of PAN card with Aadhaar card, it helps government understand how many bank accounts are there with an individual. Hence, when a government they know the exact amount of bank cards or bank accounts, here the government they can properly estimate the income of an individual. Further, with use of digital currencies or digital payments such as UPI, the banking use of individuals it has increased in the recent past. And utilizing all this data, government it can estimate the exact amount of how much a person can earn. Thereby, people they are apprehensive of misfiling or avoiding paying taxes. Further, India introduced new tax regime in previous years. However, this new tax regime it did not provide for standard deduction, which was rather provided by the old taxation regime. Thereby, people they were not able to move from old to new tax regime because of the absence of standard deduction. However, government it has also provided that new taxation regime will also include provisions for these standard deductions. Thereby, government it has simplified the tax regime by introduction of new tax regime, and it also has made this new tax regime more attractive. Further, government it has digitized the tax collection and tax estimation system. Because again, more and more transactions they are happening in formal economic sources, which enables the government to estimate the exact amount of the financial transaction. And when the government they can estimate the exact amount of transaction, then the government they have been able to digitize this tax system in the country. Further, this digitization has also increased the ease with which people can file their taxes. Because when there is a dispute in amount of taxes, you can file an e-appeal with the government. And this e-appeal system, it has eased this total system of tax regime and tax collection in the country. Also, with introduction of GST, we have seen that more and more transactions they are happening over the digital medium. And this digitization measures, it has helped government estimate the exact amount of transaction, and it has also eased the tax filing system with the people. Further, according to new laws, it is mandatory for every person to file tax returns when they have to claim their input tax credits. Now, even if you have a 10,000 rupees payment from a company, then that company will transfer your 10,000 rupees by deducting what is called a tax deduction at source, which is 10%. So, for example, every 10,000 rupees, the company it will reduce 1,000 rupees on your behalf and it will submit that to government. Now, when a person who has no burden on taxes or who is exempted from paying taxes, he or she will have to claim that tax from the government itself. And when they have to claim these taxes, that person is mandated to file IT returns. Hence, when this mandatory even to file IT returns, this has increased the compliance of people with India's tax system. Thereby, by increasing technological penetration, especially digitization of taxation system, linking of PAN numbers with Aadhaar card, making the new taxation regime more attractive, and mandating tax returns has enabled the government not just to increase its tax collection revenues, but also to enhance the tax base of the country, which is the crux of this article. Now, with this, let us move to the first summary article of the day, which appeared in Indian Express Explained section. Now, ideally, most of the cars in the country, they are called as cars which are driven by internal combustion engines. Now, these combustion engines, they use fossil fuels such as petrol, diesel, or compressed natural gas. Now, naturally, these cars which use internal combustion engine, they are highly polluting in nature. Further, India is dependent on imports to meet its demand for fossil fuels. Thereby, going forward, it is clear that India should look to electrify its road transport sector. But this electrification of road transport sector by introducing electric vehicles, it is also a challenging affair. And this is because of multiple reasons. First of all, that these electric cars, they are somewhat costly in nature. So to provide these cars at a nominal prices, what the government usually does is that it provides what is called an upfront subsidy to people. Now these subsidy can be in form of tax exemptions and also reduces the amount of tax collection by the government in form of registration taxes as well as road taxes. Now, this upfront subsidy, which is required to be paid by the government to make purchase of EVs more attractive, it imposes a fiscal burden on the government. And this is probably the most important challenge which creates hurdles in adoption of electric vehicles. Further, to charge these electric vehicles, what you need is charging network. And also these charging networks, they can be established at somewhat increased costs. Also, to charge your vehicle, it also takes more time when you compare them of filling of petrol or diesel in your car, because it only takes a matter of few minutes. While on the other hand, even the fast chargers, they take almost 2 hours to completely charge your electric vehicles. So the charging requirements and establishing a wide network of charging networks, it also is a significant hurdle in adoption of EVs. Also, how do you provide for electricity to charge your EVs? It is through an electricity source. And in this regard, most of the Scandinavian countries, they are primarily dependent on hydroelectric energy, which is a clean form of energy. But on the other hand, Indian government or India, it utilizes thermal power for more than 50% of its energy requirements. And this thermal power, it is polluting in nature. So when you use electricity which is generated through thermal power to charge your EVs, you're just shifting the burden of pollution from EVs to that of power sector. So until and unless a country is shifting to more renewable sources of electricity, this creates hurdle in adoption of EVs, because when you used to charge your EVs through thermal power, it shifts the pollution from road sector to power sector. Also, currently, India wants to shift to EVs to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels, which is mostly imported in the country, because India has only 15% of its total requirement in domestic sector. But when you have to produce electric vehicles, you require lithium and cobalt, which are important source of batteries. However, the reserves for this lithium, it is just with handful of countries such as Chile, Argentina, as well as Bolivia, and China and Australia. Whereas when you require cobalt, you have to source it from African countries, especially Congo. Also, you require nickel to produce EV batteries, which is then sourced from only handful of countries, especially Indonesia. So, India, when they have to shift to produce electric vehicles, then they will be solely dependent on a handful of nations to meet essential components such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel. Thereby, even when you shift from fossil fuels to electric vehicles, even then you will be dependent on other countries to complete this value chain. And these are four important challenges which has hindered the adoption of EVs in a developing country like India. Thereby, this news article, it highlights that companies, they should look more forward to introducing hybrid vehicles, because these hybrid vehicles, they have petrol or diesel engines of smaller capacity, and the reserve power requirement, it is fulfilled by an electric motor. And how you charge this electric motor? It is through residual power of internal combustion engine. And by using electric motor and IC engines simultaneously, what most countries have found out, that it has reduced or it has increased the efficiency of cars. So when there's a challenge in scaling up the infrastructure of producing electric vehicles and establishing charging networks, then you can meet the requirement through developing hybrid vehicles in the country. So this is what the article says, that until and unless you can meet or increase the adoption of EVs, then you can increase your reliance on hybrid cars, which not just uses IC engines, but it also uses electric vehicle technology. Now with this, let us move to the second summary article of the day, which appeared in the editorial section or op-ed section of the Hindu newspaper. Now this article, it highlights that female migrants in the country, they are somewhat disadvantaged. Now what are the reasons that increases our disadvantage of female migrants? Let us see this in this article. Now, this article highlights that the amount of female migrants in the country cannot be estimated properly by the PLFS survey. And usually the survey, it highlights that amount of unemployed female migrants in the country, they are increasingly. But is the surveys are able to estimate, are those surveys able to estimate the amount of female migrants and their employment nature? This is what is debatable according to this particular news article. And it highlights four reasons why there has been concerns with respect to female migrants. First is that these surveys, such as PLFS survey, they are somewhat inaccurate in estimating the exact employment nature of female migrants in the country. Because the only question that they ask these female migrants, that what are their primary reason for migrating, and as much as 81% of females, they have highlighted that marriage was the reason for their internal migration. But these female migrants, they are mostly employed as construction workers as well as domestic helps. And these kind of employments, they are informal in nature, thereby not adequately represented in every surveys. Thereby, due to inaccuracy of surveys, these surveys, they are unable to determine the exact nature of employment of female migrants. Further, there are also definition challenges, because these female migrants, they may be employed as a self-employed, or they may be employed or utilizing their time to do unpaid household work. Now, all these type of works, they are time taking in nature, and they also require efforts as far as females are concerned. But according to definitions, these are not categorized as employments. Thereby, even if a female is employed in these two tasks, they are categorized as unemployed in various surveys. Also, there are human and social capital barriers that these women have to face. For example, as much as 85% of migrant women, they have not achieved even 10 years of education. Thereby, their lack of education, it hinders their labor force participation, because they cannot take the exact amount of their desired jobs because of lack of education. Further, most of the policies by the government, it is targeted towards male migrants, such as e-Shram scheme, as well as one nation one ration card. And according to today's op-ed, these male targeted scheme, they ignore female migrants. Now, what should be the ideal way forward? The first is that every survey, they should have a disaggregated data of what kind of age is that of a female migrants, the number of female migrants, and their distribution across the country. Because this disaggregated data will help the government to estimate the exact amount of female migrants in the country. Further, government or surveys, they should also utilize time use data, because this time use data will help governments to estimate the exact amount of time that a woman uses or utilizes to provide self employment activities or unpaid household work. And this will help government estimate what kind of work women is doing and whether she is being paid for it or not. And by utilizing this disaggregated and time use data, then the government, they can have a special policy emphasis for female migrants. Further, these female migrants, they should also be provided with digital tools such as educational opportunities as well as employment opportunities, which will help these women seek employment and education with the use of internet. And this will not just increase their participation in labor force, but will also develop their social and human capital. Thereby, by utilizing disaggregated time use and data, by emphasizing policy with respect to female migrants, and utilizing digital tools, will help government benefit female migrants in the country. And with this, let us move to the last article of the day, which appeared in op-ed section of the Indian Express newspaper. And this article is a weekly article by C. Raja Mohan. Now, this article, it highlights that China's economic growth has reduced in the recent past and how it implicates India. Now, from 1990s to early 2000 and even early 2010s, China's economy grew manifold. And this increase in China's economy, it helped China seek parity with that of US. Now, in terms of economic growth of China, it helped China not just seek parity with US, but it also enabled China to influence India's neighbors as well as increase its economic and military footprint in the crucial Indian Ocean region. And these two factors, it impinges on India's economic and security, because then when influence of China, it increased on Indian neighbors and Indian Ocean region, it negatively affected India's influence on their neighbors and Indian Ocean region. And because of increased China's influence, India has seen somewhat hostile attitude or hostile relations with that of China, which is very much visible on our northern borders. However, recently, China's economic growth have reduced, especially after COVID period, and this can be due to multiple reasons. And according to today's article, due to reduced growth of China, the ability of China to seek parity with US has reduced significantly. And this has created a positive opportunity for India, which should rather look at seeking or reducing its difference with China as far as national power is concerned. Because as India is the world's largest growing major economy, it can then utilize this growth, economic growth, for you increasing its outreach to neighbors and increasing its military power. Because increasing military power of India will enable it to project its power in a wider region in the Indian Ocean region. And this will then help countries to gain significant level of economic development. Hence, this, according to this article, India should look forward to increase its economic growth. Because of its economic growth only, India will then be able to achieve parity with that of China. Hence, this was all for today's discussion of Daily News Simplified. And with this, I bid you a very good night.